Hey guys, Greg Alexander again, and today I'm going to bring you a new video on Texas rigging, soft plastics, and just general hooks that you would need in order to effectively fish for bass or any species that you may be targeting with soft plastics. So what's the big deal about Texas rig? I mean, can't you just go buy a hook and a bullet weight and put it on your favorite lure and throw it? Well, you can certainly do that, and you may catch some fish doing that, but to increase your chances of being most effective with a Texas rig soft plastic bait, you need to properly size the hook and the bullet weight to the conditions that you're fishing. So first, let's go through hook sizes. Hook sizes generally range from 1/0 to 5/0 for most Texas rig situations. They make a little bit bigger hooks in, some big swim bait applications, and some smaller hooks for very, very small type baits, but they're generally falling outside of the category of Texas rigging soft plastics for bass or any type of sport fish that you may be after. So what does that mean, 1/0 to 5/0? Well, a 1/0 hook is generally the size of the opening of the round bend part of the hook. For example, let me grab this here. This opening size right here is generally the alt size, not necessarily the length of the hook from here, from the line tied to the round, because that can change depending on the hook style. So the alt, 1/0, 2/0, 3/0, 4/0, 5/0 is going to be that throat or that opening size of your hook. And there's different types of hooks, some which we don't really use in bass fishing, like a circle hook, which actually has a turned in point on the end of it. And then you have your round bend hooks, and then you have your EWG or extra wide gap hooks, which the throat tends to open up sooner on it, So anyhow, so every 3/0 hook is not the same. Let me give you an example here. Here's a Gamakatsu 3/0 EWG hook. And here's a Gamakatsu skipjack hook, right? See the difference here? You see that against my shirt. They have the same throat on the end, but the shank portion of the hook is completely different. So which one do you use in which situations? Well, a 3/0, I'd say my go-to hook for Texas rigging, like 70% of the time, is going to be a 3/0 Gamakatsu EWG standard hook. Not a straight shank, but with the little keeper on there. That's my go-to hook. I throw that with weightless Senkos, Texas rig, regular Texas rig, worms like, any type of speed worm or any type of straight tail worm or any type of ribbon tail worm. Now, depending on the size of the worm, I may go a little bit larger. But when you're talking about your standard size 5-inch Senko, your standard, 6 or 7 or even 8-inch, more probably 6 or 7-inch ribbon tail worm or 6-inch straight tail worm, then I'm going to throw a 3/0 hook. And the reason I'm going to throw that 3/0 hook is because it's not obtrusive on the bait. It basically covers the bait well. And when I say covers the bait well, that hook gets, 40% down into the worm where it doesn't mess with the action of the worm, but gives you enough hook that when the bass bites it, he's going to get the hook. So that's going to be my go-to hook. It's going to be that 3/0 EWG hook. You can throw a 3/0 round bend hook also, and you probably, the hookup ratio on it's probably going to be 2 or 3, maybe 4% better with the round bend Gamakatsu hook versus the EWG hook, just because of the way that it's shaped. But to me, I spend so much time, if I'm fishing around cover, I spend so much time getting hooked, snagged with the round bend hook versus the EWG hook. To me, I feel like it in the long run, it costs me bites. So I stick with the EWG hook. So then I would throw, in other situations where I'm skipping a bait, which I do a lot of skipping, skipping creature baits, skipping worms, skipping jigs, which wouldn't apply to this situation here today. I do a lot of skipping. And with that, the best hook that I've found for that skipping situation is this Gamakatsu skip gap hook. And you can throw that in a 3/0 or 2/0 or even a 4/0. And what's so cool about this particular bait, see the shape of it? It has this little pushback here. Well, that pushes against that there, when you thread it on there, it actually pushes against the worm a little bit and keeps it from sliding down the hook. So when you're doing a lot of skipping, without having to, some people will take a little piece of toothpick or something and they'll thread it on there, and then they'll run the toothpick through the eye of the hook, which is inside of the worm, and then clip it off on both sides. And you can do that. Some people will put a dab of super glue on there, and you can do that. Or you can just pull this hook out, tie your bait on that you're planning to skip with, and forget about it. And it pretty much stays on there. And at first I was a little bit worried about the hookup ratio on the skip gap hook versus the EWG hook, but I actually found that I actually hook more fish, and I think the reason that I hook more fish on this one than the regular EWG is that it actually, it keeps the bait from balling up on the hook. Because if that bait were to slide down the hook like that, so you understand, then it creates a wad or a ball of plastic around your hook point, and it actually costs you fish. So you don't really want your bait sliding, down the hook. That's another reason that I don't really care to use the straight shank hooks that don't have the keeper on the end, because I think the bait tends to slide down and it causes issues with hookups on your fish. So you can change sizes of this. Of course, you're not going to be skipping great big baits, right? Because great big baits are going to be kind of hard to skip. So, you're pretty much going to be with the 3/0 size most of the time. You may have to go to a 2/0 if you're skipping smaller baits, like, the smaller type creature baits. You may want to go to a 2/0 versus a 3/0. Here you got a standard size creature bait and then the smaller style creature bait. This smaller style creature bait won't even properly take a 3/0 hook, because once you put it in there, the hook is actually below the body of the bait. So in that situation, you would need to change to a 2/0 hook, because it's just, the 3/0 just going to be too long for some of the smaller baits. So here's a 2/0 hook which fits perfectly into the smaller baits. So you need different length of hooks. Most of the time that can be accomplished by changing the size of your hook from 3/0 to 2/0 to 1/0 even. So that's what I would do. So you need to get, you need to get into the bigger hooks when you're dealing with bigger, bulkier baits. Like if you're throwing like a double wide beaver, which is a big bulky bait, or you're throwing any type of these Magnum, like this is a Magnum speed worm versus, a regular speed worm, you got a lot more body there and you got a lot more length too. So with this particular worm, so you're going to want to throw like a 5/0 hook with that worm because it's properly sized for the worm that you have. You just can't say, well, I'm just going to throw a 3/0 EWG hook all the time, no matter what I'm throwing, because it's just not going to work for you. So you need to properly size the hook to the particular bait that you're throwing. Think of length and diameter. Length and diameter. The bigger the diameter of the bait you're throwing, the bigger the hook you need. The longer your bait is, the bigger the hook you need. Now, I will say that you should throw the smallest hook that you can get away with, just because hooks add weight. They cause restriction in the bait's movement. So the smaller hook that you can throw, the better. I know years ago, and you don't hear much about it anymore, but years ago when people used to smallmouth fish with a Carolina rig and a lizard, they would take these little number 2, almost like a drop shot hook today, which back then they weren't even drop shotting. But they would take like this number 2 drop shot hook and just put it right through the nose of the lizard, and man, it caught everything that bit, it seemed like, because the hook was kind of, open in the tip there. So keep that in mind. Now, you can also take some of these really small hooks, like this is a 1/0 owner. And when would you use a hook that small? Well, generally when you're throwing a really small bait, or when you don't want the weight of the hook messing with your action. So for example, I would throw this 1/0, this is a EWG style 1/0 hook, small hook, when I'm drop shotting, for example, around cover. So you're literally going to Texas rig, you're generally going to Texas rig your small bait because there's too much cover to nose hook it like you would do with a regular drop shot. So you're going to literally Texas rig it around cover with a little small bait like that. And you don't want a big hook because you're using a small bait, and you don't want a big hook because you don't want the weight of the hook to make the drop shot hang. You see, because you generally want your drop shot baits to stick straight out as much as possible. So that's when you would use like a little small 1/0 hook a lot of times. Or you could throw it, if you were Texas rigging, just Texas rigging a small finesse worm, for example. Instead of putting it on a shaky head, maybe the shaky head was just snagging up way too much, and you're throwing a little shaky head around a bunch of wood, so you wanted to Texas rig it. Then you put it on a little small hook with a little small 1/8 ounce bullet weight, for example. So how about weights? So when you're Texas rigging, a Texas rig is generally a soft plastic bait with some weight or size of bullet weight on the line. Now, a lot of people talk about pegging bullet weights, and I pegged them for years, and I seem to have lost more fish than I should have. So I talked to a friend of mine one day, and he said he never pegs them, and I always felt like, it's been a long time ago now, I always felt like pegging them was my best option because I fish around a lot of cover. And you're thinking, you throw your bait in there and your bullet weight goes on one side of the stick and your lure goes on the other side of the stick, and nothing goes to the bottom. So that was kind of in my mind. And that's kind of like I did it, but I was losing a lot of fish. And you know, you don't want to give that fish any extra weight when he's shaking his head. You don't want, the more weight you have on your lure, the more chance is that he's going to throw it. No matter what lure it is you're throwing, the bigger and the heavier it is, the more leverage that fish can get on a particular lure. So if you put the weight down right on top of the head of the lure and you peg it on there, that gives him a little bit more weight to actually be able to throw the lure. So I stopped pegging my Texas rig years and years ago. And I always throw a loose bullet weight, except for when I'm punching thick vegetation. That's the only other time that I would actually peg a weight onto my Texas rig. You will catch more fish if you don't peg it. It gives the lure a lot more life and action when that kind of falls separate, and you end up with a little bit of a delay at the bottom where the weight's on the bottom but the bait's not quite yet, so then it just kind of flutters down the last little bit, and it adds action to it also, which is a good thing. So if you do peg it, you would only want to peg it in, you know, you're punching hydrilla, you're punching thick vegetation, or you're punching really thick brush. You know, thick brush that it's just not going down through there if you don't peg it. That would be the only times that I peg it. And what do you peg with? Well, there's three options in my mind. There's the bobber stopper, which it's fine, it works. I used them. If you're using a heavier weight, you know, like a 1/2 ounce on up, you're probably going to need 2 bobber stoppers on there to keep the weight from slipping all the time. But one will do it most of the time, you know, from 3/8, 1/4, 5/16, 1/8 ounce weight, 1 bobber stopper will work. And then they make the little rubber inserts that you can pull through your bullet weight to hold it in place. And they hold it in place really well, but the problem with them is if you end up changing baits and it comes off of your line, then that bullet weight is shot because that rubber gets stuck up inside of the weight, you understand? And it becomes very hard to try to extract it and get it out. And if you're dealing with, you know, tungsten bullet weights, you know, you're paying $3 and $4 a weight sometimes. You don't want that weight to be basically useless. Now, you could still probably use it. They actually make a little tool, looks like the end of a sewing needle with a little hole in it that you could stick through the rubber area, put your line through there and pull it through. So if you had that tool, you could redo it. When I did use pegging more than I do today, I used to use a flat toothpick, not a round toothpick, but a flat toothpick. And the reason I use a flat toothpick is because that flat toothpick would push next to the line up inside your bullet weight, and it didn't seem to bother the line or break the line or crimp the line. Whereas the round one creates more of a sharp edge when you stuff it up in that bullet weight with your line, and I think it damaged the line. And the thing I liked about the toothpick was I didn't have any problem with it breaking with the flat toothpick, but I could literally, you know, I could slide it up or down the line. So if I wanted to, you know, create like a split shotting type rig where you want to slide the bullet weight 6 or 8 or 10 inches up the line from your lure and you're throwing a more open cover, you could actually create a split shotting type deal. And I actually qualified for a bass national championship on Lake Cabasacante years ago with that technique. I was throwing a smallie beaver with a 1/4 ounce weight, and I was split shotting it with a toothpick. I put the 1/4 ounce weight about 1 foot up the lines. It was like a mini Carolina rig or a split shot rig, you would call it today. And I caught a 7-1 the last day of the tournament throwing that particular type bait. So, you know, that's a presentation sometimes that these fish don't see. And, you know, when they see that that lure come down like they see so many times, but then it's free and kind of coming down like that behind it after it goes to the bottom. So that's something you may try also. So what size bullet weights are you generally going to throw? Well, my go-to size, I fish a lot of rivers, I fish a lot of shallow water. My go-to size is going to be a 1/4 ounce. And I'm going to throw 1/4 ounce tungsten in black, red, or green pumpkin. Which ones do I throw which time? I generally match the color of the bullet weight to the worm. If I'm throwing a green pumpkin worm, I'm going to throw a green pumpkin bullet weight. If I'm throwing a black or black and blue or dark or purple color, I'm going to throw a black bullet weight. And I'll throw a red bullet weight for some reason when I get around tannic water that's tannic stained. That red bullet weight seems to me, or at least in my mind, it seems like it generates a few more bites than some of the other weights. A little flash or something there that those fish aren't used to. Now, some other weight sizes that I'll throw. I generally like to throw about a 1/2 ounce weight when I'm flipping thickish milfoil grass, not matted out, open little patches, holes, things like that, where I'm trying to get a reaction strike from those fish. Or sometimes I throw a 1/2 ounce if I'm not getting bit on a 1/4 ounce, where it's kind of going down more slow and tantalizing the fish. I'll up to like a 1/2 ounce weight to try to get that, that reaction bite that you can get, where some days they won't bite it on a regular weight. So sometimes the weight is all you need to change. You don't need to change the bait, anything, just the weight of the bait to generate those bites. And then if I'm, Texas rigging a bait in open water, say off of a rocky point or a sandbar or something like that, and I'm working it out a little bit deeper, so something deeper than maybe 10 feet, then I may go as high as like a 3/4 ounce sometimes on a Texas rig, and maybe an 8-inch ribbon worm or something down there. So then when you're dealing with a punching situation where you're going to punch into thick grass, you want to use the smallest weight you can use to effectively get through the grass without having to work. If you have to work at it to get it through the thick grass, then your weight's too light. So, I'll generally start with 1 ounce. And if I can't get through, you want to be able to flick it in there and it goes through. You don't have to flick it in there and have to shake it to make it go through, or aim for thin spots in the grass. You want it to just go through. So I'll start with 1 ounce. If that don't work, I'll go up to 1.5 ounces. If that don't work, I'll go to 2 ounces. If I can't get through with 2 ounces, I'm probably going to do something else, because it's just going to be too hard to effectively fish that type of situation. So when you're fishing Texas rig baits, you generally want, a heavier rod, either a heavy or a medium heavy, fast tip so you can cast it or skip it. Always throw a fast tip. The only time I wouldn't throw a fast tip Texas rigging is if I'm punching, heavy cover with 1 ounce. Then you just want a heavy, straight heavy rod, because that you're not skipping your accuracy, your underhand flipping basically. So, depending on your height, every rod's not good for everybody. I generally throw something in the 7 foot to 7'6" range, depending on the particular rod that I have. I'm 6'2", 6'3", so that rod works for me. Some of you guys that aren't as tall, if you're 5'6" or 5'8", that rod may be cumbersome for you. If you're underhand flipping, it may be just too long. So then you may want, a 6'6" to 6'8" or 6'9" rod to flip with. Medium, heavy, fast. Any good quality rod's going to work for you. I've done a couple videos on, some what rods are good and what rods aren't. You can look that up. And then I'm gonna throw that with a fast reel, something that's, 7 point something to 1 or 8 point something to 1 generally. You probably could throw, one of these super fast reels. I haven't done that, like one of these 10 point something to 1 reels, because the speed of the reel has nothing to do with what you're doing when you're flipping and pitching a Texas rig or working a Texas rig across the bottom, because that speed is completely dictated by how fast you move your rod, not how fast you reel. So the faster the reel you have, the quicker you can take up line and stay with a fish who's balling this way or balling that way, because you obviously don't ever want to have slack in your line when you're working a fish, because that's when he's getting off. So that speed gives you the ability to stay with that fish no matter what he's done, and it doesn't really affect, the action of the lure, because you're doing it with your rod again. So that's what you want. A good quality rod, medium heavy fast, or heavy for punching, and a good quality reel, fast reel, something 7 point something to 1 on up for those situations. Now line size, it depends on what you can get away with. And obviously, the dirtier the water, the bigger the line you can get away with, or even throwing braid on a Texas rig works. Now, when would I throw braid on a Texas rig? I only throw braid on a Texas rig in one situation. For me, Texas rig with braid is only basically a grass situation, either punching or working through grass. And the reason I do that braid will literally cut the grass when you hook a fish. Where if you're throwing mono or fluorocarbon, sometimes the fish gets bogged down in the grass and it can get off easier. With braid, it literally cuts it, and you can get a clean fish out of the grass compared to not being able to get him out of the grass. But my go-to line size for Texas rigging is 16-pound Sunline fluorocarbon. That's what I throw. A lot of luck with it. Some people would say that's a little on the light side, and it may be a little bit on the light side. It depends on what you're doing again. But, I haven't caught a 16-pound bass yet. So 16-pound fluorocarbon line works for me. And the reason I go lighter instead of heavier is I really feel like the lighter your line, the more bites you're going to get, because your action's much better with a lighter line. So everything you throw is going to be more realistic. Now you can kill that realism by putting too much weight on there or too big of a hook in a smaller lure, but the realism is what you're after in those situations. Now I do throw 20-pound sometimes, depending on the situation. If I'm around an area that I feel like has a lot bigger fish than I would normally be fishing for, if I'm down in a trophy lake or down in Florida, I'm probably going to throw 20. But I finished third in the Bass Eastern Invitational on Kissimmee a couple years ago, and pretty much all the fish that I caught on a Texas rig in that particular tournament were on 16-pound fluorocarbon, and I had the first or second biggest bag of the second day of the tournament, 18 pounds and something. So you got a lot of good quality fish, and I didn't have any problem, and I was around emergent grass also. So some of my fish in that tournament actually caught on 15-pound braid Texas rig and a weightless Senko, and that worked well too around the lily pads, because I could, they couldn't bog up. I could cut those lily pads when those fish bit that Senko. Instead of them getting bogged down on lily pads, I literally could cut them and get the fish out. And now, for those of you who held on this long in the video, here's the little secret thing. It's not really a secret. but you just don't hear anybody talking about it at all. Texas rigging a tube. I never Texas rig a tube directly. When I take a tube, I use this particular hook right here. This is an Eagle Claw HP hook. And one of the biggest problems with a tube that you'll have is a tube loves to ball up on your bait. So you have to stop that tube from balling up on your bait. That's the biggest thing with it. And this particular HP hook, it has a little clip on it. There's a little clip. So when you put that bait on there, when you put the bait on there and turn it, there's a little clip here that locks the head of that tube on there, so you can't pull it down now. Now this particular tube, I have actually an insert weight in here, which is like a little sinker with a ring on it. And I put the hook through the ring on that. So the weight is inside of this Texas rig, and then you just you take the hook and you can hook it through the center of the tube and then Tex pose it on the outside. Or if you're dealing with a bigger tube, then you don't want to go right through the center of the tube. You kind of want to go through the side of the tube and just grab a little bit of meat with it. But the key there is, now that cannot slide down and cause trouble for you. So these are the ways that I would Texas rig, the hooks that I would use, the weights that I would use, the line size that I would use, the rods and the reels. I hope this helps you to catch more fish. Again, thanks for watching my videos. If you want to watch them on a regular basis, please hit the subscribe button, the little like button, share it with your friends, and please put a comment in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. Have a blessed day.